If you want a job or career in web development, this video will be covering the latest modern framework of NextJS and TypeScript, which is used in most professional environments. This can also be used with React.js because Next.js is just built on top of it. The topics covered in this video are: we are going to have client-side authentication using NextAuth, and we're going to be using the Google sign-in as a provider. We're going to be using styled components, as most professional companies use that to handle their styling. We're going to create sliders with React Slick. We are going to have server-side rendering and also be using something called incremental static regeneration. We will be using TypeScript for type checking and catching bugs. Okay, so we are going to be building the Disney clone. As you can see here, we have the login page. We are currently on /login. If we click on the login button, we now have an authorization page which we can sign in with Google. So if I click sign in with Google, it will then authenticate us onto the home page. We have the Google icon here, so the same one I have in the corner. That is passed in with the session provider from NextAuth. We have the header component, a slideshow component. We have viewers that the video plays on when we hover over. We have the relevant sections on the Disney website where we have recommended, trending, new for you, and originals. And this is all with data we are fetching from the server side. These are also scrollable, so if I click, it will scroll on to the next, and then when we reach the end, the icon gets disabled, and we can also go back. Also, these are all coming from an API that we will build in our application also. If I scroll down and click through to a movie, for example, The Incredibles, I now get the URL changing to /movie/13, and then I get the relevant information for the specific movie that I clicked on. So if I go back onto my homepage and, for example, click the Winter Soldier, and again, the image is displayed as the background image. We are having a title image and we are also having the description rendered correctly. This is all done with incremental static regeneration as well. And what we can do is if we hover over our icon, we can sign out like so, and then we also get redirected back to the login page as well. So let's get started with the build. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to create a new repository on GitHub for this. So I'm just going to call it Disney Clone YT for YouTube, and then it's going to be a public profile, and I'm going to just create the repository. So now I have a few commands here that I could do. So all I'm going to do is copy this here. I am in my YouTube folder now on my terminal. So all I'm going to do is git clone and paste in the link that I have here. So now press enter. And now if I press ls, I now have my Disney clone YT folder. So now I just need to move into that. So cd Disney clone YT, press enter, and ls again. So now I'm going to install the app. So I'm going to install Next.js and TypeScript with styled components. So if I paste in with yarn, create next app with TypeScript, and I'm also going to bring in styled components. And there is an example for this. So if we just add --example with styled components, it does the initial setup of styled components for us. It adds all the configurations into the Next.js file structure for us. So if I press enter, it now prompts to give a project name. So I'm just going to name this Disney clone-yt and press enter again. Okay, so if I go into the folder, we have a components folder and we have global styles in here. We also have shared styles. So when we imported the with style component, it has given us an example. So all I want to do now is cd into my Disney clone and then yarn dev. So this will start on localhost for us. If I just refresh this and press enter, so now you can see it says welcome to Next.js, and we have an initial render of the Next.js page. So what we want to do is delete that. If we go into pages and index.tsx, we have a template here, which is what is seen on the page. So if we just delete all of this within the container, And I am also going to delete the container. So all the styles from shared styles we don't need. So if we delete them, and also delete the shared styles file, so delete. And then we will get an error. So I'm just going to render a H1 on here saying Disney Plus clone on the home page. And if I save all, so now we have a Disney Plus clone page on the home page. So the index.tsx file within the pages folder is always going to be the home page. The about would be the slash about and so on. We don't need an about.tsx in this build, so I'm going to delete that as well. And we also don't need a card.tsx, so I'm going to delete that. And I'm going to keep the global styles. I'm going to move this out of the components folder onto the main root directory and update the imports as well. So I can clean up everything here. We have a home page, underscore document.tsx. This is where the style components gets initialized and rendered. So I'll just keep that as is. And we have an app.tsx page here where we have a default theme being rendered, a global style within the theme provider, and then all our components fall within this. What I also want to do is I just want to remove the colors property from the theme. So we have direct access to the theme when we get props. And now if I go into the type of theme, so if I press command and click through, I can see the interface declared here. So I just need to update that as well. So delete the colors object. So we now have direct access to the primary and secondary colors. And if I save all and refresh, we just need to update the styles within the component. We also need to update the styles in the global styles.tsx. So where I deleted colors, it is now just theme.primary. So now that is all of the style components section complete. We just need to create the folder structure. So we have a components folder, we have a pages folder, a public folder where we will import our images and our videos. So I'm just going to copy them across now and import them into public because we will be using these later on in the project. I am also going to be creating a new folder for the types, so our TypeScript types. So if you click on that and type in types, and there's one final thing to do on the setup is in our tsconfig JSON, we want to set strict to true. So we want to actually catch the bugs and make the most of TypeScript. So now if I save and restart my app, so yarn dev, we can now get started on the build. Okay, so the first component that we want to create is the header. So if I go into my components and create a new folder named header, and in here I'm going to create a new file named index.tsx. And if you have the React functional snippets, ES67 snippets extension, then you can just type in tsrfce like so and tab, and it creates a functional component for you with types. So this one is going to be named header. We don't need any types as we don't have any props, so I'm just going to delete the types and I'm going to delete the props. And the header I'm going to import in my app.tsx just above where the components get rendered, as this is being used globally. So if I control space and imports in that way, so if I now save all, I now have the header at the top of the page, and that is regardless of the page that I go onto. So if I go back into my header, I want to change this to nav because it is a navigation that we're going to be creating. So if I create a new file called styled.tsx and import styled from style components like so, I'm just going to copy across the nav that I already have made, as I don't want to focus too much on the CSS element of this. So we have a height of 70 pixels for the nav, a background color, display of flex, align item center, which means it would align everything centrally on the horizontal axis. It will justify the content as space between. We have a padding on the top and bottom of 0 and left and right of 36px. We don't have any overflow on this, and this will have a Z index, which means it pops out of the page. And we also have a color of white for the text. I am also going to go into the app.tsx and update the colors to the ones I have already made. So paste these in. So we have a primary, secondary, a white, a bright blue, silver, and a dark gray. So these are the colors being used in this build. What also we can do is we can export this theme into its own file, but we will keep it in here for now. So going back into the header, I'm going to now import the nav from the styles.tsx like so. And now if I save everything, we now have a header being rendered on here with a child of just the text header. We do have two errors on the project. So if I go into app.tsx, it's got a few errors that we need to sort out. So essentially we need to add these to the default theme type or interface. So if I command space and paste into here, and we just need to add these new colors in, and essentially what they all are strings. So if I just paste string in here, and again, we should now have this issue resolved. So now if I save, essentially what we are doing is on our app.tsx, these colors here will be strings. So as you can see here, it is highlighting that this is a string. The same with the bright blue. This is just enforcing the types in TypeScript. So if I was to delete the speech mark from here, it would trigger an error, which it does. So I just need to add that back in. Now going back into my header, I have the outer nav rendering and it's working correctly on the page. I'm going to have the Disney logo. So I'm going to create an image. So image source is equal to, I have the URL here, which I've just copied from the Disney website, and paste that in. And then we'll just keep the alt as Disney logo. So, and if I save, we now have the Disney logo. We just need to style that as well. So I'm going to give this as a styled component. So if I name this logo, and then I'm going to import that from my styles. So go into styles, and then I'm just going to copy it across my logo styles. So export const logo, which is equal to style.image. It's going to have a width of 80%, 80 pixels, sorry, and then a cursor pointer as well. So if I now save, we now have the width of the image as 80 pixels and it's on the left. So that's the first child being rendered. So what I'm going to do now to keep the code clean is just under logo, I'm going to create a function and I'm going to name this render header. The reason I'm doing this is because there are two states of the header. There's one where we have the login button, and there is one where we have the menu items on there. So essentially what we are going to do is create a function. So const render header, and first of all going to check if the person is logged in or if the user is logged in. So if logged in, show the logged in header. But if not, then we want to show the logged out header where we have a button saying logged in. So first off, I'm going to create the login button. So I'm going to return a login container like so. So this is a div which has a login button that just says login. So now I just need to create the relevant styled component for this. So if I go into styles, we have got a login container and a login button. So if I copy the styles that I currently have across and paste them in. So the login container has a display of flex, justify content of flex end and a flex of 1, which means take up all the space that we have here. So put it at the end here. The button element it has a border of 1 pixel solid, a padding of top and bottom of 8 pixels, and left and right of 16, a 4px border radius, letter spacing of 1.5 pixels, a background color of a black with a 0.6 opacity, a transition when we hover over, a cursor pointer, so when we hover over it, we know it's a clickable element, and then the hovering styles here as well. So I am exporting them. All I need to do now is import them from styles. So this function here, we are calling after the logo. So now if I save, we now have the login button. So if I hover over it, it changes color as well. So now within this render header function, before I rendered the login container, we are going to check if the user is signed in. If they are signed in, then we render whatever we return from there. Otherwise, if they are not signed in, then we render the login button here like so. This way it keeps the return on the header component quite neat and tidy. We have a logo image here on the left, and then whatever is on the right is getting handled in this render header function. So now what we need to do is install authentication with NextAuth. So if you go onto the website, nextauth.js, and click get started, it does say here how to install. So we are using yarn. So yarn add NextAuth. So if I just copy this and create a new terminal, I'm going to just install NextAuth into the project. So we also are using TypeScript. So we have TypeScript documentation here. But what I am essentially going to do is add a new file. So it says here, add an API route. So to add NextAuth to a project, create a file in Pages API Auth. So if we go into Pages, we want to create a new folder in here called API. And we will also be creating our Movies API within the API folder. And then a new folder within API named Auth, and then within Auth a new file, and we're going to give it brackets next Auth and close the brackets .ts because we're using TypeScript. So now I'm just going to copy this across, paste this in, and we will get some errors. So if I just open this up, and instead of GitHub, we're going to be using Google. So if I just go, instead of GitHub, I'm just going to change all of the GitHub. So this will be Google, because we will need an API key from Google themselves. And then we are going to import that from /Google, like so. We also need to create a .env file. So I'm going to go into the package.json level, and then a new file in here named .env, which is where we will have our env files, and I'm just going to call this one Google ID. So Google underscore ID is equal to an empty string for now, because we need to go and get that, and we're going to get a Google underscore secret key as well. So we will do that later on. Okay, so going back into the NextAuth TS file, we are getting an error. So if we hover over it, it's essentially saying that we need to provide a string in here. So because this is not a string, we are importing it from the env file. We just want to put in here straight after as string. That should fix the error, and the same with the secret key. And we also need to update the name. So I'm just going to name this Google underscore client ID, or ID, and then Google client underscore secret. Just copy this and go back into our NextAuth TS. And this is going to be the secret, and this is going to be the Google ID. So now we have that initial setup complete. We now need to go ahead and get a Google API and secret keys. So if we go into the Google API console for developers, and I want to agree and continue. So this is my first time on this account setting it up. So I want to dismiss this and go into credentials and then create a new project. I'm going to name this Disney Clone YouTube and create. So the project will be getting created. So now we want to select the project. Okay, I've got this, and then configure consent screen, and just click external for now and create. I can ignore the learn section. So give this an app name of Disney Plus. I'm just going to put my email in there, my Gmail. We don't need a logo. We don't need any of this. And then again, just give in my email address. So if we go on to credentials and then create credentials, and we want to go on OAuth client ID, the application type is a web application. I'm just going to give it a name of Disney client, and we are using localhost 3000. So I'm going to add the URI in here, And for authorized redirect URIs, if we just go on to NextAuth and type in URI, the redirect URI, so we've got that here. So it'll be localhost /API/auth/callback, and then you put the provider name in here, so that in our case is Google. So if I now create, I now have the ID and the secret, so I'm just going to add these into my env file like so, and these will be deleted at the end of the video, and I'll get new ones for here so they won't be used. So if I press OK, and now if I save all and go back into my NextAuth file, I want to delete this because we're only going to be using Google as the providers. So now with NextAuth, we should have access to something called use session. So if I type in use session, which is already there, we can get access to the status or whether the person is logged in or not. So if I copy this across and go into my header component, so where it says here, if logged in, show the header at the top of the functional component, we're just going to paste in the session that we are using and import in the use session from NextAuth, paste that in, and then we want to have a check to say if session, we want to return a new component which we will create called signed in header, like so. And we also want to pass down the session as a prop into there because we want to log in and log out, and we have access to that within the session object. So if I save, we need to create a new folder within here named signed in header, so a new folder called signed in header, and this will have an index.tsx file and tsrfce named signed in header, which will take in the session as props. And instead of type, I'm going to give this an interface, so interface of props, and this will take in a session, and I'm going to declare this session as session, and this is coming from NextAuth like so. So now that's the sign in header rendering. So if I save, we have an error within here, so we just need to import the signed in header component, and now we can remove this comment. So essentially this render header function now is saying if there is a session, we want to return the signed in header. Otherwise, we want to return the login container. And this is being rendered in here after the logo image. So if I now render header, and what we need to do in the login container is we have access to use session, which is in here. So in use session, if I scroll down further, we should have a sign in and sign out, which is on here. So if I import sign in from NextAuth React, and also if I import sign out, which is a bit further down, and then all you need to do is add an on click on there to say sign in. So ours is the login. So if we paste that in, close that off, and now if I save and go into my local host and refresh, so now we also need to wrap a session provider around the app. So if I go into my app.tsx and just above global styles, I'm going to import session provider from NextAuth React, close that off, and then add the children within there. And then the session provider has access to the session, which is equal to props.session. So now I'm going to restart the server. So on dev, and if I refresh the page and press log in, we now get directed to /API/auth/sign in. And if I click sign in with Google, it directs me to the sign in with Google page. And if I just log in with my Gmail account, so now as you can see, we are signed in and we are seeing the signed in header. So if I go into header, and if there is a session, return the signed in header. I'm passing in the session. So if we go in here, and now we are seeing the header. So it's just a case of now rendering out the menu items on there. So I'm going to import a nav menu. So if I paste that in, so this is rendering out the navigation menu of the links that we want to have on the page. So home, search, watch list, originals, movies and series. So I'm going to import the nav menu styles into our styles file. So in here, import the nav menu styles. So it is a display of flex, and we are going to give it a flex of 1 to give it as much space as possible. We're going to have a margin left of 25 pixels on there, so it gives a bit of space after the logo. The span text, I'm going to have a font size of 13 pixels, some letter spacing, position of relative, and a text decoration of none. So because it is an A tag, we don't want to have the underlines on there. We're going to give it a slight transition when we hover over, so we're going to give that a line and background of white, or in this case we'll give it the props of white, so props and then props.theme white. This after section will have a position of absolute because it will be underneath the text, a left and right of 0 and a bottom of -6 as we are positioning it underneath, and then a slight little transition which you can copy, but it kind of goes from left to right. The image, so the image icon on the left of it will have a height of 20 pixels, and again styling the A tag here, and if it reaches a width of 768 pixels or less, then we won't display it at all. So if I go back into here and control space and import the styles, and now if I save, we now have the menu items rendering, and as you can see, the after effect is showing when we hover over as well. So now that the menu is rendering, we just need to create a sign out button here and also show the icon of our Gmail login. So a circle in the corner or whatever we have as an image. So if I create a section named sign out as a div, and now there are 2 children within here and we can only have 1, so I'm going to create a React fragment, which is the shorthand version. So if you just put empty brackets in like that, and then if I copy this and push it up 1, and in the sign out div we are going to render an image. So in this case it will be a user img. This will be the image and the source will be equal to, and first off what I want to do is comment this out for now, and at the top where we are getting our props we want to console log the session, so session, and now if I save and inspect the page, so if I go into my console I get 2 objects in here. I'm just going to open one of them up, and in here we get a session and in here we get a user. So the user has an image, as you can see here, an image with the URL. So what I'm going to do is render that as my user image source. So if I uncomment this, and then it is going to be session, and we're going to add optional chaining to see if we have a session dot user dot image like so, and then the alt tag for this is going to equal the same, but in this case we're going to just take the name, so session user dot name. So I now need to add the styles for the sign out and the user image. So if I go back into my styles and paste this in, so I've got a sign out, a drop down and a user image. So if I go back and import them in and close this off, save all. So we now have the circle with the user image on there. That is working correctly. Now when we hover over the icon, I want to show a sign out button. So all I want to do now is have a drop down span underneath. So we have imported the styles for the drop down, and in here we're going to have a span which says sign out, and all we are going to do is have an on click span on click of sign out being called, and this will be called from NextAuth React, and that's imported in from NextAuth React there. So now we're getting an error in here saying no overload matches this call because it could be undefined. So what we essentially want to do is check if there is a session first before we render. So if session is true, we want to return the user image like so. Otherwise, we want to return null. And now if I save, so now I have this error. So what I am going to do is I'm going to put this into a constant. So if I cut this out, and I'm just going to call this image. So at the top here, I'm going to give it a const of image is equal to session.user.image as a string. And I want to do the same for the name. So image is going to be changed to name as a string. So on the alt, I'm just going to give this the name as the constant and save. So now if I log in and sign in with Google, I get redirected to the new signed in header. And now if I hover over, we have sign out here. So if I just click on that, we are now signed out also. One slight tweak is sign out should be one word, and now I should save. So that is the header complete and the NextAuth implementation complete as well. Now what we will do is build out the login page. Okay, so now we're going to create the login page. So if I go into pages and a new file called login.tsx, and then essentially I'm just going to copy what's on home and paste that in here. And home, it will be turned to login. We are going to create a component called sign up. So sign up, which will get rendered on the login page. So if we go into our component folder and create a new folder named sign up, and in here create a new file named index.tsx, and we're just going to say RFCE as we won't need any props being passed down for this. So this will be named sign up. And now if I go back in login and import this in and now save, and if we go into localhost 3000/login, we now have the sign up component rendering on there. So if I go into my sign up component, essentially what we want to do is render out the CTA and the background image for the Disney login page. So we will have the Disney logo, the headline, the description, and the input field, which will be the email input and the button to sign up. This will all be visual, so there won't be any functionality other than when we click the button, we will be signing in and then getting redirected to the home page. If I copy what I already have and paste this in, so in my return block, I want to render out the following. So we have a container that has a CTA, and within the CTA, we have our logo. We are loading lazy. So this is a shorthand method to do lazy loading for your image. We have a headline, a description, an input component, which we will comment out for now because we need to make that, and a description saying you get 12 months for the price of 10. So all we need to do now is create a new file called styles.tsx and then import the styled in also. So just to highlight the styled, the background is going to be covered with an image. So we're going to give it a position of relative and a min height of 100 viewport height. The URL is copied from the login page on the Disney Plus website. And then everything else is self-contained. So the CTA will be hovering on the left. So it will have a padding of 80 and 40 pixels with a max width of 650 pixels. And then we have some media queries handling the width and the align items. So the logo will take up 50% of its container. The headline has a font size of 1.5 rem and align the text to the left. And then the description has a font size of 11 pixels also. So now if I import these from the styles file, and now if I save all, we have everything rendering, but the text is in black, so we can't see it. So what I need to do is go into my global styles and give the headings and the p tag a color. So if I paste them in and save, we now can see the text. And if I expand out, the image is also on the right. We just now need to insert the input component. So if I create that now, so if I close my header and within sign up, I want to create a new folder. This will be called input, and in here we're going to have an index.tsx file or FCE, as this will not receive any props, and this will be named input. So in here we're going to have a container once again, and within this container we're going to first off have an email input field, which will have no functionality, with the placeholder equal to email. and then we will also have a sign up link. So this will have functionality. So sign up link, and the text inside will say continue. So now on the sign up link, we need an on click, and on the on click, we are going to get the sign in function from NextAuth React. So sign in from NextAuth React like so. So that's the functionality complete. We just need to add the styling for the input. So again, styles.tsx, and I'm just going to copy over my styles for this. So paste this in. We have the container, which has a width of 100%, a display of flex, a line item center, and justify content center, a margin, and a flex wrap of wrap. The email input is a styled.input, and we have given this a background color of the dark gray with a border of the dark gray also, and that's 1px solid. The color within is props.theme.white, and then we are going to give this a flex with 0.7, which means that it would take up 70% of its 100% width, which is declared up here. The sign up link would be a link that takes up 30% as its width, and also a background color of bright blue and some padding on there as well. So if I go into the index and import these files from the styles, and now if I save, and what I need to do also is render the input. So inserting that, and I'm importing it from /input, and now save. We now have the input rendering on the page, as you can see. So there are two entry points to log in. So you can log in here, or you can log in there also. So now if I go back into my login page, what I want to do is add some functionality in here to say when we log in, we want to then redirect to the home page. So what we want to do is get access to use session from NextAuth React, and within there we are destructuring the data and the status. So within the data we can access the session, and essentially what we want to do is if there is a session, then we want to redirect to the home page. So what we need is a router. So that is from next router. So if I import const router is equal to use router from next router like so. So now if we have a session, we want to push. So router dot push to an object containing the path name. We want to push the path name to the /, and now if I save, we want to do this on the page load. So we can use effect, and in here we are passing in a callback, which is this code snippet here that we have just created. So if there is a session, and we only want to do this on page load, so we pass in an empty dependency. So when the component mounts, we pass in, if there is a session, router.push to the path name of /, which is the home page directory. And then we also want to return anonymous function. So now if I save, I want to add another guard clause in there. So if status, which is what we are accessing from the session, is equal to or triple equal to the string of loading, then we just want to return a p tag saying loading. And just finally, to add extra checks, we want to say if there is no session, then we want to return the sign up page. So now if I save and go onto the home page, the functionality is still not there. So what we want to do is we want to go into our API and NextAuth TS. We need to add a callback in here. So what I will do is just copy what I already have. So the callbacks will be added in here. So if the URL includes /login, we want to return the home page. If the URL doesn't include the /, meaning we're on the home page, then return to /login. So now if I save all and go into my terminal, restart my server, so take it out and yarn dev again and refresh my page and go into /login. And then if I log in now, I now get directed to the home page. So now that is the login and functionality for the login page complete. Next, we will do the home page. Okay, so now that the login page is complete, we just need to do the same for the home page. So if I just copy what I have here I'll paste it in my homepage. So on here, I'm just going to paste in the use session from NextAuth React, use router from Next Router, use effect again from React, and then the session. If there is no session, then we want to redirect to the login page this time. And again, if status is loading, return loading. And if there is a session, then we want to return the Disney clone. So now if I save, there isn't a session, so I need to log in, sign in with Google, and now I'm on the homepage like so. And what I want to do is I want to create a new component in here called home layout. And if I close this off as well, now in my components folder, I'm going to create a new folder called home layout. And in here, a file called index.tsx, save. And the home layout will take props in this time because we are going to get movie data from the API. So if we do tsrfce, and for now, I'm just going to name this home layout. And in this div, we're going to have a few elements. So we're going to have the slider banner. Then we're going to have categories. So these are the categories that we hover over. So Pixar, Disney, Star, and them sort of categories. And if we hover over them, then a video will be shown. Then we are going to have rows, the relevant movies. So we will have a title, and then underneath we will render out the movies that fit that title. So we will be using the filter method and then mapping across on each row. So first off, I'm going to start with the banner. So within home layout, I'm going to create a new folder named slider banner. And in here, we're going to create a new file named index.tsx. And in the banner, we are going to do rfce slider banner. And what we need to do now is import React Slick. If you want to React Slick, and here go onto the docs, and we need to add React Slick into our project. So open a new terminal and paste yarn add React Slick in there. I also need to install Slick Carousel. So if I copy that across and go into my terminal and yarn add Slick Carousel /save. So now that is in there, we need to include the CSS files also. So if I copy them and import them at the top, and I'm going to rename the div to a carousel, which will take in settings that we pass across. So we spread settings, and up top here, I have already got the settings, so I'll just copy and paste them in. But essentially, we want the dots underneath for the slides to be true. We want it to be infinite, so it goes to the end and then goes back to the first. We have a speed on there. We will show one slide at a time, and it will autoplay as well. So now we have the carousel, and within the carousel, I'm just going to paste in my slides. So we have a container for each one, and within the container we have an image being rendered. So the container for the images is named wrap. So what we could also do is each wrap could be a separate component, and then within the component we pass the image down as props, and then we render the image that way. But for now, we're just going to render it like this. It's not how you would do it in a production environment. It's just a way to render out everything in one slide for our slider so we can visually see what is being shown. So now what I need to do is create the styles.tsx file. And in our styled file, we want to paste in what I already have. So I am essentially importing slider from React Slick. So this is the carousel, and I am editing the slider from React Slick. In here, I've got a margin top of 20 pixels. We are accessing the class name of Slick list to show that there is an overflow and it is visible. Increasing the font sizes of the buttons to 10 pixels and give it a white color. The slick dots, which is the bottom, which shows the slider position. So these dots here, we want to have them at the bottom right of the image. So now if I save everything and import, we will visually see what is happening. And the wrap also from the styles. So if I save, and in styles, we have an error which says React Slick is not there. So what we need to do is close our terminal and restart again. And we need to import the home layout and save. So now that we've created the slider, we just need to import it into the home layout. So where the slider banner is, I'm just going to import that in. And if I save, so to debug this problem, if I go into my package.json, I do have Slick Carousel installed here. So what I need to do is go into my file and just remove this from here. And now if I save, I now have the slider rendering on the page. So now if I go into the home layout component, close this one off in here, this div is going to get styled. So I'm going to name this container so we can bring the margin on the left and right in a little bit. And I'm going to create a new file in the home layout named styles.tsx. And if I just copy my styles over, paste them in, so export the container, which is equal to style.main. So we are using semantic HTML tags. So this is the main element on the page. We're going to give it a min height of 100 VH minus the 70 from the header, some padding as well on the left and the right, a position of relative and overflow on the x-axis of hidden. Before anything renders on the page, we're going to give it a background of the home background, which is located in the public slash images slash home background.png. It will be behind any other elements on that page. And then we are also going to style all the corresponding H4s with a font size of 1.3 rem and some letter spacing and some line height. So if I go back into my home layout and import the container from /styles, so now we are rendering the slider banner. Now if I save, so because the background image is in the images folder, I just need to add /images/home background like so. And now if I save, we now have the background rendering on the home page. So if I go back into the index.tsx file on the home layout, I now need to create the categories component. Okay, so now that the slider is done, I'm going to create a category component. So if I go into my components and create a new folder called categories, and in here, I'm just going to create a new file, which is named index.tsx, rfce, for a functional snippet, and it's going to be called categories. And then I also want to render that in my home layout, categories. And I'm going to also move the categories in within the home layout as well, just so it's all contained within the home layout folder. So in categories, index.js, that is exporting, and now I need to import it. So that is working correctly. Now if I save, I should now see the categories component, which is here. The text is in black. So essentially we want to create 6 category components that are the same. So we want to map over them, showing 3 on the top and 3 on the bottom. And then when we get to a bigger screen, then we can show 6 in a row. So first thing I'm going to do is create a container, and the container is going to be imported from styles. So if I create a styles.tsx file, and if I import my container, I also want to import style components. And in my container, I'm going to have a margin top because it is touching at the minute of 30 pixels, a display of grid, the following padding, and we want to have 6 columns in total, so that should be 6. And then create a gap between the columns of 25 pixels and a border radius of 10. And then when we drop to 768 pixels and below, then we change the columns to 3. So if I go into my index file now and import this from the /styles, and now if I save, we have that in there. So we need to render some children within the container. So we want to first off create some data and map a reusable component. So the best way to do this is to create an array of objects. So what I'm going to do is in my categories here, I'm going to create a new file called data.tsx. And I already have the data created. So I'm going to say export const video data, which is equal to an array. And I'm going to paste in 6 objects in here. And we have an ID, which is a number, a name, which is a string of Disney. The video is coming from /videos/Disney MP4. And we also have an image URL, which we are getting from the Disney website. If we hover over video data, we can see here that TypeScript is already inferring the types. But what I want to do is create the type for the video data. So I can easily just copy this. And in types, I want to create a new file called videos.ts, like so. And in here, I'm going to export the interface of the video data, which is an object, like so. And I'm going to take this out and delete this as well. So now we have access to the video data type. So if I go back into my data.tsx, I can now declare the type on here. So if I give it a colon and video data and import this with control spacebar from types, there is still an error because it is an object that I have stated here. So an object that contains ID of a number, name of string, video of string, and image URL of string. So all I need to do now here on video data type is just add array brackets like so. And I'm still getting the error. So what I will do is rename this to type, video data type, again video data type, and then if I go into types here again, video data type, and now if I save, I now have the video data in my data tsx file, and I have given it a type of video data type, which is an object that contains the relevant information, and that is within an array. So if I was to change this to a string, for example, it now throws an error of ID saying that type string is not assignable to number. So all I need to do is take that back and keep it as a number for the ID. So now if I save, we have our first type, which is the videos.ts, and we have our data file here. So in index.tsx, I have now got the data. So now I'm going to get access to the video data. So video data from /data, and I want to map over this. So optional chaining. So if video data is there, then I want to map over it. And for each video that I have, or movie, whatever you want to call it, I want to implicitly return within the JSX. So implicitly return is when you do the parentheses like so. And in here, I'm going to render a component, with relevant data being passed down, relevant data being passed down as props. So in this case, the data we will be getting is the individual video itself, and that will be of video data type only and not the array. So what I want to do is create a component named category content, but before I do that, I want to create a wrapper. So this will wrap across the category content. So category content is going to be a component, and the wrapper will be the style. So I already have the style for the wrapper, which I will paste in. It has a border, a background color. The image has a background color as well. That is a linear gradient. A border radius for each of the wrappers of 10 pixels. A cursor pointer because it is going to be a hoverable element. A box shadow on each wrapper with a transition. So when we hover over, we want to transition into the video. And then we also add a scale on there so the wrapper itself increases in size. So if I go back into my index.js and the wrapper is wrapper like so, and if I import this from /styles, I now need to create a category content folder within my categories. So new folder, category content, and this will have an index.tsx file, and again rfce, pasting in the category content, and this will receive some props, which will be the video, a default image, and a name. And we will define this in props, so props like so. And then in here, it's best practice to add the interface props, and the props that are received are these ones over here. And all of these props will be strings, so they will all be receiving strings on here like so. And if I just copy this, paste that in and paste that in, so now if I save, we should get an error because we aren't passing anything down into category content, and we are also not rendering the components. So if I import that, I have an error on here saying it is missing the following properties from type props. So we need to pass them in. So if I just copy this and paste that in, so the video is going to be equal to, and if I go into my data.tsx, I have a video here. So video is equal to video.video, which does not make sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to item and then rename this item so it does make sense. The default image is going to be equal to item dot. And the thing is with TypeScript, because we've already declared the type, it does provide as documentation, and we can see here we have 4 properties that we can access. So for our default image, I want to get the item.image URL like so. So it saves me going back and forth or looking and console logging the data. And then finally, item dot, and then I have access to the name. And with our wrapper, always, as if we map through something, we want to give it a key. This will be the item ID. So now I'm passing the right props in. I can now remove these comments. And then now if I save, I also need to go to the home page. And now we have 6 category contents rendering. And when we hover over them, we are showing the right data here. So if I go to a smaller screen size, it does go to the 3 and 3 in 2 rows. So now the categories section is complete. We now need to go into the category content section. So we need to render out an image, and also when we hover over, we want a video to be playing, and that will be accessed from data.tsx. Once again, the video mp4 file, but we have passed down the props now and we just need to render it out. So for this, I'm going to import a package called React Hover Video Player. So if we open a new tab and paste this in, and there is a package on npm called React Hover Video Player, which is where if we hover over, we'll see the video player there. So if I copy this and close my terminal, and instead of npm, I'm going to do yarn add and paste it in. We want to take out the npm I and now press enter. So this should install. It does provide documentation here of what we want. So I'm just going to run my dev again, and I'm going to first off import the video player from React Hover Video Player, and then I've got this component here that is getting rendered. So if I just copy this and paste it in my return block within the JSX. So for the video source, I'm now going to use my video that I'm getting passed down from the props. The paused overlay is an image. So what I'm going to do is use the next image tag for this, which provides many benefits, and you can read this up on the Next.js website, but essentially it converts your image to a base64 string and it loads more efficiently and it optimizes the image also. So for this, I'm going to have a source which is equal to default image, which is being passed down from the props. So we're using that. The alt will be the name, which I am passing down from the props. And I am going to ignore the style here because Next.js has built-in styles on the image component. So I'm just going to give it a layout of fill, which will mean that it will cover its entire parent div element, and we don't need a loading overlay, so I will delete that as well. So now if I save and go back into my local host, we now have an error, which means that we need to add a URL onto our host name, which is the prod ripcut delivery plus net. So this happens when we use the next image component. So it essentially means that we can only use predefined URLs. So if I go into my next config.js and after compiler, I'm going to add an images object in here, which takes in domains, and this will be an array of domains. So I'm going to paste in my domain like so, and if I save, what I now need to do is restart the server because I've made changes to the next config file. So if I do yarn dev and I want to go to the home page, I'm still getting this error. So if I just scroll along, they all have the same URL, and I can see the issue, which is the domains. I need to put an S on the end, and if I save again and again restart the server, the yarn dev, and now if I go into the home page, we now have the images rendering, and if we go to bigger and then smaller. So now if I hover over at the Pixar, we now have the Pixar video playing, and the same with the Disney and the Marvel and the National Geographic as well. So now that is the categories section complete. The final thing we need to do is create a reusable film component which renders the rows that we looked at the beginning of the video. So if we go into our home layout and close these folders, so we have the categories and the slider banner contained within the home layouts component. So if I go into index.tsx for the home layout and delete this comment for the categories, the final thing left to do is the rows with the relevant movies. I'm now going to copy the titles across that we need. So the first title is recommended for you. Second one is trending. The third one is new for you. And the final one is originals. Now if I save, we have them rendering here. So what we need to do now is create the row for them. But before we do that, we need to create both the APIs. So to create an API with Next.js is quite simple. All we do is go into our pages folder, and within API, we have a folder called Auth. We just want to create a new folder in here, and I'm going to call this movies. And within movies, I just want to create a new file called index.ts, like so. So if I go on to /movies, then I will have a file on there. So if I go into localhost 3000 /API/movies, we will have access to an API here. At the minute, we don't have one, so we will create one. So if we go into our next documentation on API routes, we can first of all see we have pages/API/user.js. So in our case, it will be pages/API/movies. So I'm just going to copy this handler function here and paste this in over here. And instead of the name being John Doe, I'm going to have an array of objects which I have already defined. So if I just copy this across, we have a long list of 19 objects in here. So we want to return this, and each one is separated by a type, which is original, or it could be new, or whatever it may be. And that is what is going to be filtered into each of these rows. If I save in my file and then refresh the /API/movies, we now have the API data here. So it's as simple as creating that. I now have two errors here, which are TypeScript errors. So if I control space, nothing happens. So on a handler function, we get a request and a response. So for the request, we can import it from Next API request and Next API response. So I'm just going to paste this in. And as you can imagine, the request is going to have a type of Next API request, and the response is going to have a type of Next API response, like so. And now if I save, I now have the get all movies route defined. So now what we want to do is create a individual movies route. So if I go into here and go into dynamic API routes, as you can see, we have a /pages/API/post, and then we have a wildcard id.js. So we want to create our own wildcard on there. So in movies, I'm going to create a new file and going to have array brackets of id, close the brackets, .ts, like so. So essentially what we want to do now is when we go to / the ID of 4, we want to return the ID of this one here, which is tangled. So if I press enter, at the minute, again, we have the same error, which is resolver is not a function. So in our id.ts, I want to define our list. So I've already got this here as a constant. So essentially, if we get the array of the objects that we have, so const movie list, scroll to the top, is here, and I also want to give this a type. So if I go into and close this component and into my types and create a new file, and I'm going to name this movie list.ts, like so, and this movie list is going to contain the same as this object over here. So in my movie list, rename this to ts.ts, and we want to export the interface of movie list type. So movie list type, which is an object, and this object will contain the following data. So first off, we want to remove the extra closing and opening brackets, and this type will be string. And essentially most of them will be a string. So if we paste this in, paste in another string here, this one is a string also, so is this one. As you can see, they all are strings apart from this one, which is a number. And now if I save, we have a movie list type that we are exporting. And now if I go back into my API and paste in, import this from the types. Again, this is an array of objects. So if we add the array brackets here, so we have defined the movie list. Now, if we go into our file here, essentially we want to create a handler. So if I copy movie list, scroll to the bottom, paste in the movie list here, and if I just copy this syntax across into my ID file, so essentially what we want to get is the slug, or in our case it's going to be the ID. So instead of that, it'll be ID, so request.query.id. And if I go into my index again, we want to copy the request and response, so I'll copy this across from there, and then we can just control spacebar to import from next, like so. Now we have access to the ID, which is in the params, which is /4. We essentially want to filter out the relevant ID from the movie filter that we have declared above. So const filtered movie is equal to movie list, that's there, dot filter. Each movie we want to return the movie dot ID that is equal to the ID that we get from the request.query.id, like so. And if I just delete this res.end here, what we also want to do is get the first index of this. So if we add the array brackets at the end and 0, and then as you do with Node.js, because this is essentially Node.js, we want to send the data as a 200 response. So res.send the 200 response JSON. So we want to convert to JSON the filtered movie, like so. So now if I save and refresh the page, we get 200. We should change this to status instead. Save and refresh. We aren't getting anything back. So that is because ID would be a string within the URL, whereas movie.id is a number. So essentially what we need to do is this condition will always return false since the types number and string have no overlap. So we need to convert the movie ID to a string. So easiest way to do that is to wrap it around a string, like so. And now if I save and refresh the page, we now have access to the individual movie and the individual movie data, like so. So if I change this to 7, we should get a different response, which we do, and we get the title of my music story, like so. So that is the APIs complete. What we now need to do is render out the films onto the home page. So now that we have created the API for our project, if I go onto the home page, so if I close down the API and go into index.tsx, we now want to fetch the data but on the server side, so before the page is loaded. So if I go into Next.js documentation here and search for GetServerSideProps, essentially we want to get the props from the server side and pass them down into our home component here. So we want to access the movie results that we fetch from the server side. And then I'm also going to create an interface for this, and that is props of movie results. And then what we essentially are going to do is pass this down as a prop into home layout and then render down the film rows that way. So this will be equal to movie list type, like so. But for now, we will just leave that, and I will explain get server side prop as it says on the Next.js documentation. So essentially, it will pre-render this page on each request using the data returned by GetServerSideProps. So you got examples of when it runs here. So it's only going to be exported from a page. So when you should use GetServerSideProps is only if you need to render a page whose data must be fetched at request time. This could be due to the nature of the data or properties of the request. Pages using GetServerSideProps will be server-side rendered at request time and only be cached if cache control headers are configured. So essentially what will happen is we will fetch the data once at build time and then it will get cached. So the data will always be there unless we change the data. But in this case, we won't be changing the movie data. So at the bottom of my index.tsx, I'm going to get a function called GetServerSideProps, and there are examples of this on the Next.js documentation, but I'm just going to type it out. It will be slightly different because we are using TypeScript, so there will be some types we need to import from Next.js. So export const GetServerSideProps, and this is going to get a type of GetServerSideProps from Next, which is equal to an async function. And then we have a callback, so get server side props, and I'm going to get my movie result. So const movie result is equal to await fetch, and we're going to get it from here. So if I copy this and paste this in, so essentially we are going to get access to all of the movies here, and then we're going to convert them to JSON. And then once we have done that, after this block, we're going to return props, and the props we are going to return is the movie result. So return movie results like so, and also colon this off like that. And TypeScript's quite good at inferring the types anyway, so if there isn't an error, you would just leave it and allow TypeScript to do its thing. So now we are getting movie results. So in our console, we should be getting access to this in the index route. So movie list type, I'm now going to console log this out. So console log movie results equal to movie results. And now if I save and go back into my home page and inspect the home page, in my console, I am now getting the object back of this. However, I'm not getting the movie results back. It's showing up as undefined. So what I need to do is add an array. It is an array that is getting returned. So if I now save and now get access to the movie results, and there is an array of 20 objects in there. So now I am getting access to the movie results. We now just need to pass this down as props into home layout as movie results, and I'm just going to copy this interface across into the home layout index.ts and paste that in and import this as props and get our relevant type from movie list type. So now if I save, we now have access to the movie results. So what I now need to do is create film component that will render the movies for the relevant category. Okay, so now that we have our movie results being passed down as props and we are seeing this in the console, we now want to create a reusable FilmsRow component. So FilmsRow component, and I'm going to go into components and create a new folder named FilmsRow, and in here create a new file index.tsx, and this is going to be a TypeScript file, so tsrfce FilmsRow like so. And if I go back into my home layout, I can now import this from FilmsRow, and we are also going to pass down the movie results into there, and I'm also going to copy again the props into the FilmsRow component. What you can also do is, because we are reusing the same props over and over, we can export this into a type and then import that into here. But for consistency, we're just going to keep this interface as props and pass in the relevant data and types. So import movie list type again, and this is going to be the movie result like so. This is also going to be a React Slick container. So I'm going to have a container in here and create a styles file. So a new file, styles.tsx, and I'm going to copy once again my styles across. So I'm going to import slider from React Slick also, and then the container is going to be a div. It's going to take in a prop called add margin, and we will add the margin onto the last films row of 15 pixels at the bottom when we reach the original section, so that it doesn't touch the bottom of the page. And we are going to have a width of 100 view width. So now if I import container from the styles file like so, within the container we are going to have the content, which is also going to be the slider from React Slick. So I am going to pass in the settings, so spread them in, and these settings are going to be responsive also. So I will just copy them across like so. So we have the settings here, we have no dots, and it's not infinite. So when we reach the end, then we can only press the back arrow to go back. we're going to show 4 slides and scroll 2 each time. And we have got 3 breakpoints on there. I just need to move this up slightly to after props like so. So now the settings are being passed into the content. We now need to get the content from the styles file. So we have already imported the slider. So the content will be styled.slider as we did with the slider banner component. And we are going to have a gap again of 25 pixels, a width of 89%, a margin top of 30 pixels, a display of flex so it's in a row, and we want to align the items centrally. So now if I import this as well, so within each slider we are going to get access to the props or movie results, and if that is true, then we want to map, again optional chaining, so movie results.map for each movie. I want to implicitly return a div element, so a div, and within the div we're going to have a wrapper, and the key for each wrapper will be the movie dot. And again, we can have access to the properties within the movie, so I'm going to choose the ID as the key. We also need to add this into the styles file, so if I paste this in here, this will be the styles for each movie. So the wrapper will have a margin of top and bottom of 0, 15 pixels on the left and right. We will have a border of 4 pixels solid, a radius of 8 pixels, so it's round, an overflow X, the horizontal axis here, as hidden, a min width for each wrapper of 200 pixels. Each wrapper will have a box shadow similar to this one here. It will also have a transition, so when we hover, it will scale in size. The border when we hover will be white and the same border radius of 8 pixels. And with the image, we will have a width of 100% and a height of 100%. And an object fit of cover, which means fit the image as much as possible within its container. So now if I import the wrapper also from styles, and in the wrapper I want to have an image, so the source will be the movie dot, and then it will be the card image, and then the alt will be the movie dot title. And I'm also going to add loading of lazy on there as well, so we are optimizing correctly. So now if I save, we now have the images loading and the cards loading. So if I open this up and we scroll, as you can see, the images are loading lazily. So I'm just going to take that out so that we can see them. And if I save again, all of the images are now loading. But what we are doing is we are loading the entire API. So we have a list of 20 objects on the API, and we want to filter out the ones on the relevant section. So we only want to filter out the ones that have a certain type. So in this case, it should be recommend. If we look at the API, we want to filter out the type of recommend. So if we go back into our home layout, into our index file, we want to pass down a category also. So the category is going to be equal to a string. And if I go into the API, I want to filter the category as recommend for this one. And now if I go into FilmsRow, I will get access to the category. And then I'll also need to add this into my interface. So category will be a string. So now that I have access to the category, I want to also filter. So movie results, first off, we want to first off dot filter. So for each movie or item, I will call this one, I want to filter out the item that is equal to the category. So item dot type, so in the API it is type, is equal to the category that we are passing in. So for this example, it will be the recommend type that we will pass through. So we should have Miss Marvel in there, and we should have only 4 or 5 wrappers in there. So if I go into my local host and now press save all, as you can see now, the data has changed and the slides have changed. So we now have only 4 on here. So now that we have created the films row, all we need to do now is render that out a few more times on the homepage layout. So if I delete the comments, and then I'm just going to copy this and paste it under each title. like so. So each title has a relevant films row, and then the category is the only thing that needs changing. So for the second row, the category name or type would be trending. So this one will be trending. For new, it will be new. And then if we find an original, if I now save and go back into my local host, I now have all the categories rendering on the page. So at the bottom now we need to add the margin. So the last item, so the last films row, I'm going to put add margin as the Boolean value and the prop. So if I copy this and go into my films row and paste that in, we also need to paste it in here as a Boolean value. And this will cause an error if I save all. So on the container, if I put add margin is equal to add margin like so, and I go back into here, I now have an error saying add margin is missing in type movie results. So what I need to do now is go into the films row, and because this is an optional prop, I'm going to put in the question mark like so, and that will mean that it is an optional prop, so we don't have to pass it in always. So now if I save, that should add the margin at the bottom, which it has done. There's a little margin now. And if we test the films row out, it is working correctly. What we now need to do is render out the links for each film row item. So within here, within each wrapper, I'm going to have the link tag wrapped around it and close the link off as well, like so. So if we import this from next link, and it's going to have a href of /movies/movie ID. So the ID of each movie that we have, if we click through, we should get the relevant page. So if I now save, I should now be able to go through to each of these and go through to the page. So /movies/3 would be the Simpsons. But because the page is not yet built, we would get nothing on there. So what I need to do now is to create the page. So if I press back, we have the home page and the individual films rendering and linking to the correct pages. All we need to do now is to create these pages. So if I go into pages, I have my API folder here. I'm just going to create a new folder in here. So we have a directory of /movies/movie ID. So similar to how we did the API, I'm going to create a movies folder, and in here I'm going to create a file, a wildcard file. So array brackets ID, close the brackets dot tsx, like so. So now if we do tsrfce, and I'm going to name this movie information, and now in here we're going to have an interface and pass down some data that we will fetch from the API individual endpoint, so /API/movies/7, and we will do this with incremental static regeneration. So now when we click through to an individual film, for example, The Incredibles, we want to essentially get the relevant data for this. So this is /13. So if I go into here and type /13, we should get this information here. We have an error, so I'm just going to export the default function on here. So it's going to be export default function of movie information. Now save. So we now have the relevant information on this page. What we need to do is fetch the data for all of the ID paths that we have on here. So essentially we want to find out how many IDs there are within the API. We only want to stop until we reach the last ID. So we will do this with GetStaticPaths and GetStaticProps. So if we go into here, we have access to GetStaticPaths, which gets the amount of paths on here that we need. So essentially we want to get the amount of IDs we have within the APIs, and this generates post 1, 2, and so on. And then we want to also get static paths, which requires GetStaticProps. So essentially what GetStaticPath is when you export a function called GetStaticPaths, static site generation from a page that uses dynamic routes. So in this case, we are using a wildcard ID, so /movies/the ID number. NextJS will statically pre-render all the paths specified by GetStaticPaths. So essentially we will specify the ID's length, and then if we go into GetStaticProps, Next.js will pre-render a page at build time using the props returned by GetStaticProps. You can read up more about this on the docs here, so these are the two sections to read up upon. So we will get started on the movie information page. So first off, I want to get all of the paths from the /movies API, so this API over here where it has the entire list of all the movies. So export const get static paths, and we also want to get the static paths type from next here, as you can see, which is equal to an async function which has a callback in here, and we want to get a response. So const res is equal to, so await fetch the data from localhost /API /movies, and then the movie data, so const movie data is equal to await response.json, like so. So now we want to define the paths or the length of IDs that we have on here. So const paths is equal to the movie data that we have just received dot map. So for each movie we want to return an object, and this object will be params, and in the params we want to have a key value pair, so we will destructure an ID property which is equal to movie.id, but because this movie.id is a number, we want to convert it into a string. So if we wrap it around in a string like so, we now have the params.id here stated. And just finally, we want to return the paths that we have just declared above, and we want to give it a fallback of false. And to see what a fallback of false is, if we just search for a fallback of false, and if a fallback is false, then any path not returned by GetStaticPaths will result in a 404 page. So for example, anything after the ID of 19, so anything after /20 would result in a 404 page. We also have a type error here, so movie implicitly has any type. So all I'm going to do here is import the movie type from the types file, movie list type like so, and this is going to be an object. So now we have the path set, we now need to fetch the props. So if I just copy this, and this is going to be GetStaticProps this time instead of paths, and we are going to get the props and not the paths from next. And within here, we will now have access to the context object. So if I pass in the context like so, and then in here, I want to destructure the ID from context.params. So const ID is equal to context.params. Now if I save, property ID does not exist on typepast URL query. So I'm going to declare an interface for this. So interface of iparams extends the parsed URL query from query string, as you can see here. And in here, we're going to define the ID as a string. So all we now need to do is context.params as the iparam. So now we have destructured the ID from the context.params that we have set up in the GetStaticPaths section up here. I now want to pass the movie results down as a prop. So const movie results is equal to await fetch, and this time we're going to give template literals. So what we want to fetch is this here. So localhost 3000 /API /movies, and this is going to be a dynamic value. So we are now going to pass in the ID here, and then we're going to chain a dot then, which gives a response, and we're going to convert the response to JSON. And then the final thing is to return the props. So props, and in here we just want to pass down the movie result, and as a second argument we are also going to revalidate as 100, which means that the pages will be statically generated at build time only, and then after that we can choose to revalidate the pages, so recheck the pages every 100 seconds. If you wanted to do it more, then we can do so. I may just do 1,000. on here. Now all that is left to do is pass the movie results down into the props, so movie results, and we also need to add this into the interface. And again, this will be the movie list type that we have already imported in here. And before I return the movie information text, I want to console log movie results from the ID page. Now, if I save all and inspect my page, in my console, I have undefined of ID page. If I just refresh again, it is building now, so it's building the cache of the data. And now, as you can see here, we have the /13 and we have the relevant data for this page. So if I go on to /6, for example, we now have the relevant ID for the /6 ID as well. So now all that is left to do is create the page, so the movie information page. But what I'm going to do is create a component called film layout, similar to what we did with the home layout as well. Okay, so now we have the movie results data being passed down. What we need to do is create a film layout. So if I go into my components and create a new folder called film layout or movie layout, whatever you prefer. And in here, I'm going to create a index.tsx file and tsrfce, and this will be named film layout like so. We are going to get the movie results. So I'm going to pass in the movie results and have this as an interface, which is what I prefer instead of types. And then in my IDTSX, render out the film layout from the relevant import. So in components /film layout, the movie results is going to be passed down as a prop. Movie results is equal to movie result. So now if I go into the films layout, I should also be getting the movie result, which is equal to the movie list type, because it is just the one object here. And now if I save all, the film layout is now being rendered, as you can see on here. Now there are a lot of elements that are going to be rendered within this. So first off, I'm going to have a container, as we always do. And we are going to create a styled file for the film layout. So styles.tsx, and I'm going to import all of the styles that I need. First off, I want the container to be 100 view height, an overflow horizontal of hidden, a display of block, a top of 0 pixels so it covers the top, padding for our children, and a color of white. So now if I import this from styles and now save, everything is going to be contained in here. I also want to have inline styling in here just to show you how that would work. So if I copy what I have and paste it in and save, we now have the background of the relevant movie here. So what is essentially happening is we are setting the background image as a URL, and within the URL, we are passing in the movie results background image. So this image here in the props that are being received, we're going to increase the opacity to 0.8, a background position of center, a background repeat of no repeat, and a background size of cover, which means essentially cover the whole page. So if we did a ID of 15, for example, as you can see, the relevant movie background is being rendered. And if you do 1, same again. So now if I save, we just need the children section to be implemented now. Also, it's not recommended to do inline styling and then adding style components in a professional environment. It's just to show you how you would do either or. I would recommend to stay and keep consistent with your folder structure and how you put your styles into the relevant folders like we are doing now. But this inline styling can be done on certain occasions. So in my children, I want to add an image title, which I have already defined, and I will copy this across. So in here and paste. And I also want to import these styles. Now we have the image title, which is the source of movie results.title image. So if I go into my styles, the image title is here. We want to display flex, align items towards the end, so flex end, justify content as flex start, a margin of 0 auto, a height of 30 VH, a min height of 170 pixels, a padding bottom of 24 pixels to separate what's underneath, and then also a width of 100%. I'm going to also pull in the controls into our index, which will be the buttons underneath the image. And we just need to import these as well from the styles file. So we have a play button, a trailer button, an add button, and a group watch button. So now if I save, we have them rendering underneath. Underneath the controls, we want to render the subtitle and the description. So if we pull the subtitle from the styles and the description from the styles, so the subtitle is movie results.subtitle and movie results.description, and delete this container here as it's a duplicate, and now save. We have the relevant text rendering on the page also. Just to go over the styles, we have the controls, so display or flex in a row and align items centrally on the horizontal axis. The play button is this button here where we hover over. It's got a border radius of 4 pixels, a font size of 15 pixels, display of flex and align items as center. It's got a height of 56 and a background of a slightly kind of whitish color. Padding on the left and right of 24 pixels, and then we have some margin to separate on this right here to the next container, and we also have this letter spacing of 1.8 pixels. We also have a cursor pointer on there, and then when we hover over, the background changes as well. With the trailer button, we are essentially copying the play button in terms of the styling, but it's just a change in background, border, and color. The add button and watch button are similar. They have a border radius of 50%, and the only difference would be the background color, that is the RGB of black. The subtitle has a certain font size of 15 pixels, and then the description font size is 20 pixels. So now if I save everything, we should have the project complete now. So if I go into the home page, so /home, we now have the home page that has the banner above. We have the categories that are rendering the relevant images and videos on here. We have filtered categories for the films rows, and then if we was to click on one, we get taken to the relevant page with the relevant ID. So we are getting this with GetStaticPaths and GetStaticProps. Both server side, we are fetching the data. So if I now log out of the site and click sign out, I should now get redirected to the home page. So I need to implement that feature. So as we have done with the home page, I just want to add this functionality into the /movie/ID page. So id.tsx, and in my props, paste in the use session hook, the use router hook, and the use effect. And we want to check if there is no session, then we want to redirect to the login page, like so. And if there is a session, then we want to return the film results. So if I now save, we are now redirected to the login page. So if I was to click login and sign in with Google, we are now authenticated on here. And if I was to click onto Incredibles, for example, we have the page rendering the relevant information. If I was to sign out, I now get redirected to the login page as well.